We are continuing our talk on Is Human Morality So Human? And this is a talk that Lubavitch Rebbe said on the 1st of February in 1992, following on the heels of Friday's very pivotal and unprecedented meeting at the UN, at the United Nations. Unlike how of course, the normal protocol, where we have ambassadors representing the countries, this was so significant, the heads of states themselves came and they proclaimed this new world order where we're going to move globally toward disarmament, and we're going to take that money and use it to help people of the world and to help them with food, to help them support themselves. And the Rebbe said, wow, this is messianic. This is literally the beginning of Isaiah's most famous prophecy, and they'll beat their swords into plowshares. It's happening now. And it's happening in Manhattan because Manhattan is geographically so close to Brooklyn, where we have the seat of the leader of world Jewry, the Mashiach of our times. Now, the Rebbe here is not talking about himself, me. He always refers to his predecessor. His influence is spreading over the entire world through all the emissaries he sends worldwide. And those emissaries are not only emissaries for the Jewish people. They're not only emissaries for the 15 million some Jews in the world. They also are primarily emissaries for 8 billion of mankind. Because, as we discussed at length last week, every human being is very precious. Every human being, God wants. God wants every human being to remember him and to have a relationship with him. So therefore, when the Rebbe, when the leader of world Jewry is sending emissaries all over the world, he's sending those emissaries to bring every Jew back to his relationship with God his Father. And he's sending him for every non-Jew, for every human being, to bring him back to God his Father. That every single human being should have a relationship with God. And therefore, we have done so much work, and there's been so much change and such a shift that now the world itself is moving in a messianic direction. Now the world itself is saying, we want peace. We want the fulfillment of this prophecy of Isaiah. We don't want to put our money into war. We want to put our money into helping people. And then the Rebbe connected this to this Torah portion. This is a Torah portion of Mishpatim. Mishpatim means civil laws. Laws that, if God didn't tell you, you could probably make them up yourself. And many people seemingly have. Don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't lie. Morality laws. Laws that are rational. And in Judaism, though, we say, even if you're living in a country where the laws of the country are exactly the same as God's laws in these civil matters, like stealing, you can't go to secular court. You have to go to a Jewish court, because it's not like God and this secular country have the same law. No. But yeah, they do. This is a consequence for this exact same offense. It's the same law. No, it's not. Because when it's God's laws, it's completely different. Based on that premise, even if it seems the same when it's God's laws, it's completely different, we can understand then that our perspective when we keep these laws should be, these laws are so rational, and I'm doing them super rationally. I have no clue why I'm doing it. I only know this is what God wants. What do you mean? Of course you understand that there has to be a consequence for theft or for violence or for murder or for... Of course there has to be a consequence. I mean, that's so normal and rational. No. I'm fulfilling these laws the same way I fulfill laws that are clearly super rational, like not mixing milk and meat, or testimonial like the Sabbath or the holidays. Nope, I fulfill these laws the exact same way. What's the way? This is the will of God. It's the will of God not to mix milk and meat or wool and linen. Doesn't make sense in my brain. Doesn't have to make sense in my brain. It's the will of God for me to keep the Sabbath, which is a testimony to God's creation of the world. And it's the will of God for someone to not steal and not kill, not lie, not commit adultery, not harm animals. It's the same inexplicable will of God. That's the first explanation the Rebbe gave us on the concept of these laws as mishpatim, as civil laws. The Rebbe is going to explain now more deeply this concept. When we say mishpatim, when we say things are rational, right? A mishpat is a civil rational law. It is rational. It is logical in my mind that there has to be a consequence to prevent murder, God forbid, or things far less than that, like thievery. It is rational that God prohibits lying, that God prohibits stealing, that God prohibits gossip. All those things make perfect sense to me. Do you know why they make sense to me? Because God wrote them in his Torah, And Torah is the blueprint for creation. So since God wrote in his Torah that it's wrong to steal, that it's wrong to kill, that it's wrong to gossip, and this Torah created and penetrated the world, the energy of Torah, we might call it today the vibe of Torah, the perspective of the Torah, has trickled into the headspace of man. So our human thoughts, how we view the world, what we think of as rational, is all coming from the thoughts of Torah. So when we look at the world and we say, well, of course it's wrong to steal, and every society knows that, hopefully, most of them, that's just normal, that's just rational, that's just common sense morality and decency and functionality. We can all live together. We have to have these type of understanding. The reason why we think this way, the Rebbe says, is not from our own innate sense of reason and morality. It's because that's what God wrote in his Torah. And his Torah, all of these years, especially as the Jewish people received the Torah 3,300 some years ago, which means for the past 3,300 plus years, Jews all over the world have been learning Torah, have been talking Torah, have been living Torah. All of this, the learning of Torah and the talking of Torah and the living of Torah, more and more forcefully have caused Torah to penetrate into the psyche of man, to penetrate into the worldview. And that's why we naturally think like Torah does. Which is why we have what we call mishpatim, rational laws. And how can I prove to you they're rational? Because all moral, normal societies of the world have sort of similar laws, maybe different consequences, but the basic premises we all agree on. The reason we all agree on these laws is because we're all getting the morality from the same place, from the Torah. And because it's the Torah's morality, it has trickled in to become our morality as well. So when I said, is human morality human? The answer, of course, is no. Human morality is godly. Human morality is God's morality. It's Torah's morality. But it has become mishpatim, civil laws, rational laws, normative laws, laws that most societies have, because we're all so molded and impacted by the Torah, the creation of the world, and the constant life force of the world. Torah created the world. God looked in the Torah and created the world. And Torah constantly is the force God's using to recreate the world. So Torah is very, very impactful. And you said, especially when we have for thousands of years Jews living and learning and talking Torah. How much more so is Torah impacting the world and therefore impacting our mind, saturating our mind with God's morality, so that becomes our norm. We wouldn't call it a new norm, but it is. It's just a new norm that we've had for a very, very, very long time. Do you see this in yourself? Now, what do I mean, do you see this in yourself? We're saying that the more Torah is studied, the more God's morality becomes ours. So do you see in yourself, the more you study the Torah, as you study it as Noahides, the morality of Torah, the rational, civil morality of Torah, becomes your natural way of thinking. Now, again, you could say, I don't have any difference because beforehand I always thought like this. Or you could be like, no, my mind shifted.
Definitely, my mind shifted, for sure. That,
And things that before you didn't think were so bad, the more you, I'm just putting in my words, the more you
yes,
learn Torah, the more, no, they're really bad.
yes, right, exactly. Yeah,
That's exactly how it's supposed to be. That was a picture perfect answer, because we have certain things that God clearly says is wrong. And being raised in 21st century ultra liberal America or Western world, the world says maybe it's wrong, possibly it's wrong, it could be wrong. It's a subjective interpretation if you view it as wrong, but you can have your subjective interpretation, no problem. So can everyone else. So it all becomes this wishy-washy mush of morality, of values.
exactly.
So here's Danielle, very nice person, very good person. I'm sure she was always a nice and good person. But when she's being educated and raised in an environment that's a mush, it's a little hard to have the clear perspective of right and wrong. And the more you
Yeah,
study Torah, the more you have it.
exactly. It makes everything so clear. We need that direction. We have to have it.
Exactly. You can't we can't do it on human morality. You know, it's if human morality is not inspired by God morality, it's a very dangerous thing. Like the Rebbe would say about what happened in Nazi Germany, where Germany was a very cultured, educated nation that prided itself that it was a very cultured and educated nation. And all this culture and all this perspective and worldview and education somehow all became compliant in bestial abuse and genocide. And somehow the human mind was saying, yeah, that's fine. That's absolutely in consonance with our world perspective. So when we don't have this overarching God vision, it could get really, 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 really warped in man's vision. But the more we learn Torah, the more we immerse ourselves in God's thoughts, the more our morality naturally is in sync with Torah. So we don't feel it like it's a superimposed, well, I don't know, but this is what God wants, so I just have to listen, but whatever. I don't know that in my moral barometer I would make these judgments. That's not what happens. The more you learn Torah, the more you do make these judgments with your own moral barometer, because it becomes very clear. And God's vision of morality literally integrates into your mind, and that becomes a normal, moral, rational, not nullified to God's inexplicable desire. It's a normal, rational, moral perspective on the world. So the Rebbe says here very clearly that the same way it is with Torah in general, for a Noahide, that's how it is with serving God as a Noahide. That it should be very rational and normal and moral, and it's how you think of the world. Well, no, it's actually how God thinks of the world. But God's Torah has so impacted the world, and so impacted the Noahides, especially the Noahides studying Torah, that that's how you see the world. Anyone else has had this type of transformative or inner shift experience? The more they, as a Noahide, studied Torah, the more they saw their thoughts on morality changing. Not the more they're nullified to God's thoughts, but the more they actually see how their own thoughts shift and their own personal, so to speak, vision of the world is just somehow naturally more and more in sync with God's.
I think for me, learning Shmirat Halashon is something that, oh my God, it's so hard for me. Like I was like, contemplating about it. I was like, maybe God is putting me in this position because I'm not learning. I still need to learn. But having said that, I think learning Torah, is that um, it's a responsibility. um like I cannot claim that innocent anymore. It's not a bliss anymore because it's a responsibility. And not just that, how I that's why sometimes I kind of have to think, um really true, if someone is asking me what is my religious belief or something like that, because I'm representing something, right? So yeah, so I think it's a responsibility for sure. I'm still learning for sure every day. Yeah,
I'm
thank you.
also still learning. God's wisdom, God's Torah is limitless. Someone said they mastered it and they stopped learning. That would be a little scary. We are all still learning. Anyone else? Hi, Robin.
Hi, Sarah.
Anyone else? Anyone else wants to chime in? Sabra?
Well, I'm still kind of new to being a Noahide, and I'm not sure what I'm supposed to study in the Torah and what I'm not supposed to study. So I'm having a hard time getting started. Um, but I'm learning a lot from my fiance Bob's example. He's a Noahide, and he sees things in a very godly perspective, and it helps me. But I would like to study Torah. I just don't know what I'm supposed to study or not supposed to study.
That is an excellent question. That question already shows you have a lot of knowledge, because it shows that you understand that as a Noahide, there are things you're supposed to study and things you're not supposed to study, and that's great. There's tremendous amount you are allowed to study as a Noahide. Tremendous amount. All of what we would call Mishnah, meaning the basic laws as recorded in the Mishnah, which would include, for example, ethics of the fathers. That's why we've done ethics of the fathers several times in class, because that's Mishnah. Mishnah is clearly something a Noahide can study. The most foundational thing a Noahide should study, which I know you are studying in Bob's Monday night class, is the laws.
The divine
What does
code.
God want from a Noahide, which was codified, an amazing innovation of our time, that a big rabbi in Israel codified them, written it all in Hebrew, and then like, well, that's not going to help so many Noahides having their code of law in Hebrew. So it was translated, and yes, it's called the Divine Code. And those 700 pages is the go-to of the Noahide to study and study and study, because there's a lot of laws and details in those 700 pages. And you could say, well, they're not all relevant to me, so why should I? Let me just skip to the ones that are relevant. But the truth is that we believe and know that as we study law, we connect to God through that law. So, for example, Maimonides codified all of law. And I try to learn that regularly. And most of what I'm learning has absolutely no relevancy to my practical life. But this is how I connect to God's will and wisdom as it's embedded in the law. So when you're learning through those 700 pages and several times over, again and again and again, I'm sure much of it you'll say, well, that has no relevance to me. But guess what? God connects to me through studying his law. And therefore, it's valuable to study all of it.
All of it.
In terms of Chumash, one can study the first two Torah portions, Bereshis and Noach. Bereshis because it's creation, Genesis, and Noach because that's, again, also what impacted mankind with the flood. We're all descendants of Noah, so the story of Noah in the Torah is relevant to everyone. Much of Hasidic thought you can study in terms of Hasidic thought as the idea of bringing us closer to God, trust, divine providence. Those types of topics are relevant to all. Prayer. Prayer is relevant to the Noahide because the Noahide can and should pray to God regularly. So anything on prayer would also be very relevant and very beneficial. And the list can go on and on. That was from the top of my head.
Thank
so
you.
there's a lot of things we can study, but you're absolutely right. You should always try to screen with someone what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. Of course, a simple way to do it is to listen to lectures. I don't remember how many hundred I have on our YouTube channel, Bnos Rabbeinu, which has this Noahide playlist of a lot of classes. And there's, I'm sure, many other YouTube channels for Noahides. And all of those playlists of classes of Torah, all, of course, as Torah that is curated, that it is exactly right for Noahides. That's a great question.
Thank
Definitely,
you.
of course, as we study, and the more we study, the more we start thinking in a godlike way. Again, at the same time, and this is sort of the nuanced balance here, we don't want to fall into the trap and say, well, the Noahide laws are very rational, which they are. They're all completely rational. Every Noahide law is rational. And every Noahide law is so rational because our minds think along the line of God in his Torah, as his Torah has created and gives vitality and has been learned and studied and lived for thousands of years. But we never want to fall into the trap of say, so it's not like because God decided that we can't steal. I mean, I would never steal anyway. I'd never stole before I learned about being a Noahide, so of course I don't steal. No. Then we fell into the trap, meaning on one hand, we're saying the more Torah impacts the world, the more we naturally think along the lines of Torah, and therefore every one of the Noahide laws is so natural and normal and rational to us, and very likely as good people, we were keeping most of them before we knew about them. At the same time, as a Noahide, we're keeping them because this is the will of God. So on one hand, it's so natural and rational to me, God's will, because Torah has impacted what I think is natural and rational. And at the same time, and I'm doing this because it's God's will. It's not an inexplicable will. It's such a rational will because God has molded my thinking, but I'm doing it because it's God's will. And Maimonides writes clearly that if someone keeps the Noahide laws because they make sense to him, he's not a Noahide. Imagine, he's doing everything the Noahide does. But he's not a Noach. Because he's not keeping it because God is keeping it because, of course, I do that. I mean, come on, who do you think I am? Of course. Then he's not a Noahide. He lost it. He's not wise. He's a fool. He's doing all the right things, but not for the right reason. And very often, if I speak to someone about being a Noahide, even very briefly, if I have a brief conversation with someone, I would normally say something like, well, you're not supposed to steal, you're not supposed to kill, hopefully you haven't stolen or killed too recently, you know, like you're a good person, I'm sure you keep all this. But you have to do it because God says. So on one hand, God wants it to be very, very, very rational to us because his Torah is impacting our minds. And the more we learn his Torah, the more it's impacting our mind. So the more it's rational to us. And on the other hand, but we're not doing it because it's rational to us. We're doing it because this is the will of God.
And that's why we dig deeper, during these classes, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
To get in touch with that will of God. Absolutely. The Rebbe continues and says that now in our world, what's rational to us are the civil laws, the laws we call the rational law. By the redemption, because God's inner Torah, his inner secrets, his inner thoughts will so permeate the world, the mysteries of God will be rational to us. Meaning now, if we look at all the Noahide laws, there's, of course, the basic 7 we know, and then, of course, we said there's trust in God, there's prayer, there's Torah study as applicable, there's honoring one's parents. But all of these things, plus all the others that we know, all are rational to us because Torah has penetrated our brains and made them rational. Well, by Mashiach, by the redemption, there'll be so much more Torah flooding the world, so much more Torah impressing itself on the world because by Mashiach, the inner secrets of God will come out. It'll be like a new Torah comes forth from me. My inner secrets are coming out. So those inner secrets will flood the world. So the same way now, it's rational for us not to gossip, to honor your parents. It will be rational to us all of the mysteries of the very existence of God. Then we can say, well, that makes no sense. That could never be rational. That's about God, and that's a mystery, and that's inexplicable by definition. True. But guess what? If God's Torah hadn't washed the world, do not steal and do not kill wouldn't be any rational either. We'd be like, what? Why? Come on. Obviously, sometimes you got to get rid of someone like you have no choice. And I mean, listen, if I can take something that someone else's, like, why not? They should have been watching it better. I'm teaching them that they should watch their things better. What's the problem? Everyone does it. It would be a very, very, very different world because it wouldn't feel rational to us that of course it's wrong to steal. Of course it's wrong to kill. It's only rational to us because Torah has changed us. So similarly, we can have that vision of a man who doesn't feel there's problem with killing or stealing, or imagine progressing that forward. Men, their minds so changed that the existence of God in all of his divine mysteries is just as rational to us. That will be life by Mashiach. That will be a life when our brains look at God. Can I make sense with it now? No. No. But it will. It absolutely will. That's the error. Any thoughts on this? Any thoughts for yourself as you're studying, as you see also your vision of God making more and more sense to you, more and more as you envision the world, as you envision life, as you envision God? Anyone want to comment on that? That transition of self to a messianic reality when the inner secrets of God will be perfectly rational to us? So now the Rebbe comes after all this to what we were discussing here. This peace treaty, this UN peace treaty that continued at Camp David on Saturday with even greater strength, the Rebbe said. The Rebbe says, let's plug these two things in together. We were discussing originally this amazing UN peace treaty made Friday, preceded Wednesday by the President Bush's State of the Union address, telling America we're going to demilitarize and take money and put it into the social services and food and supporting the poor of our country. And we are just saying how rational laws are rational because God's Torah has penetrated the world and changed our minds. And now we're putting this all together because we're looking at this peace treaty. And what is this peace treaty saying? This peace treaty is people getting together and saying, war is a really bad thing. War is so destructive. People lose their lives. Children don't have fathers. Wives don't have husbands. Countries' economies are ruined. Buildings are going up in smoke. It's so aggressive. It's so nasty. It's so destructive. It's such a waste. We got to stop this. This is like completely irrational. And the Rebbe said, what's happening here? The world has been fighting since the beginning of time. And you know what? It never made any sense. Nations have been warring against nations, families against families, within nations, civil wars, riots, rebellions, terrorism. This is the nature of man. The nature of man is all of this horrible stuff. And what's happening? Suddenly in 1992, man says, that's not so smart. War is so destructive. War is so wasteful. War is so damaging. What are we doing this for? Well, it took you over 5,000 years to figure that one out? Like, what's going on? War always made no sense. And people always fought. Now suddenly they're saying, like, tisk, tisk. This is so childlike. Let's stop being children. I mean, it's a great idea. But why suddenly now are we stopping being children and stopping being destructive and stopping being aggressive and stopping being wasteful and stopping war? What happened? The Rebbe says, you know what happened? Just as we said that God's Torah imprints man's mind and man's mind shifts, the same thing is happening in this. Because what's happening, as we said from the beginning, is the world is going in a messianic dimension. In the times of redemption, there will be no war. There will be no aggression. There will be no destruction like this. And the world is shifting to think, so to speak, naturally along the lines of redemption. Along the lines of war is aggressive, evil, that has no place in a good society. And we're a good society. So what caused this shift? How did the world suddenly wake up and realize all this and move in a messianic direction? The Rebbe says, because in the Jewish world, the Jewish kings, who are the Jewish kings? The Talmud says, who are our kings? Our kings are our rabbis. The rabbis are the kings. The voice of Torah, those are the kings. That's the voice of authority. So rabbis got together and they decreed as a legal verdict, legal in Jewish law verdict, that we've already reached the time of redemption. This really started, the Rebbe said, with the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, that he declared that we're ready at the time. He said, we finished all the work of exile. It's all done. We're ready for redemption. He said that a long time ago. He said that in the 1940s. Now, what did the rabbis now do? Now means in 1992. The rabbis wrote as a legal verdict signed by hundreds of rabbis all over the world that we've reached the time of redemption. We've reached the time when we have, now this is a Jewish legal term, it's called Becheskas Mashiach. We have the potential probability of the Redeemer already. In other words, we always know there's someone in the world who is the probable Mashiach. And when God gives him the green light, he will go and redeem the world and become the absolute Mashiach. The probable Mashiach in the Hebrew halachic legal term is called Becheskas Mashiach. The absolute, he redeems the Jewish people and the world, and we're in Jerusalem with a temple, is Mashiach Vadai, the absolute, certain Redeemer. So the rabbis wrote and signed hundreds of them. We have reached the time of redemption. King from the Davidic house will rise up. It is presumed that he is the Redeemer. Of course, this is a reference to the Rebbe himself. The Rebbe said that verdict was very good. That legal doctrine of the rabbis was good. It should get even stronger. The rabbis should come out as a legal doctrine that we have the absolute Redeemer. It's not just the presumed Redeemer. It's real deal. It's happened. Now, the rabbis did not say that in 1992, but several years later, I believe it was in 97, the rabbis came out, hundreds of rabbis signing that, referring to the Lubavitcher Rebbe as the absolute Redeemer, Mashiach Vadai. The Rebbe says, this is already going back to 1992. The fact that the rabbis, the kings of the Jews, are proclaiming this as a legal verdict has shifted the headspace of the leaders of the world. The leaders of the Jews are proclaiming we've reached the time of redemption. The leaders of the world have absorbed this subconsciously. Obviously, they don't know about this verdict. Probably not. They probably never read it. They're probably not thinking we should have this UN decision because the Jewish rabbis have proclaimed this is a time of redemption. But it's penetrated their mind. Torah penetrates the mind of the world. Just as we said that why do we think it's inappropriate to steal? Because that's what Torah teaches. And Torah's morality has made us think differently. So when Torah is saying, as a legal verdict of hundreds of rabbis, we have reached the time of redemption, we are at the stage of the presumed Redeemer, this Torah trickles into the minds of the world, and especially the leaders of the world, and they start thinking, along the lines of a messianic vision of the world. And in a messianic vision of the world, there's nothing more preposterous. There's nothing more ridiculous. There's nothing more absurd than war. And that's why the leaders of the world are saying, war? What are we doing that for? They suddenly are smarter than the predecessors of the past 5,000 years? We've reached the time of redemption. The Torah is saying we've reached the time of redemption. So now in the minds of the leaders, they're thinking along the lines of redemption. So there's a lot of interesting things the Rebbe is bringing out here. One interesting thing he's bringing out is that this legal verdict of the rabbis really changes reality. Yeah, you could say, okay, so a bunch of rabbis, okay, it was impressive. It's hundreds of rabbis. It's all over the world rabbis. They're signing a piece of paper. And the Rebbe is saying this is changing the mindset of the leaders of the world, and Bush and Yeltsin are thinking differently because of this piece of paper. Well, it's Torah. Because of this Torah. But really? So it's interesting. Years earlier, years earlier, I don't remember when, but many years before 92, at one of the gatherings of the Rebbe, private gatherings, not a public gathering, this was at a meal. In the early years, the Rebbe would have the holiday meals together with an elite group of followers and rabbis. It was a small and very, exclusive thing to be able to be eating with the Rebbe the holiday meal. So at one such meal, the Rebbe told the rabbis, and I believe these rabbis were a group of rabbis from Israel, very honorable rabbis that had come to join the Rebbe for the holiday. I believe this was the Sukkot holiday. And this must have been before Sukkot when this happened. It's a little vague in my brain. I don't want to be misquoted. It was sometime in the high holiday season. And the Rebbe said to the rabbis, you should say as a legal verdict that Mashiach should come. And they were like, whoa, who are we to say as a legal verdict Mashiach should come? So one of the rabbis said, who are we to say this? The Rebbe should say this. The Rebbe is the leader of world Jewry. He should say Mashiach should come. We're just some rabbis. The Rebbe didn't respond, but he didn't look very pleased. Then later, on the Sukkot holiday, the same group of rabbis was eating with the Rebbe the holiday meal. And one of the rabbis said to the Rebbe, there's Israeli boys here, yeshiva students, that came from Israel to spend the holiday with the Rebbe. And they want to know how should they behave in terms of the second days of the holiday. What this means is in Israel, generally speaking, holidays are 1 day, and outside of Israel, holidays are 2 days. Besides for Rosh Hashanah, which is also 2 days in Israel. But there's 1 day of the holiday of Passover when we have 2. There's 1 day of the final days of the holiday of Passover and we have 2. There's 1 day of the first days of Sukkot, we have 2. There's 1 day which is a combined Shemini Atzeres Simchas Torah, we have 2. So here are these boys, these young men, that are from Israel, that live in Israel, and in Israel they always kept 1 day. Now they're by the Rebbe. Well, the Rebbe's in Brooklyn. Obviously, by the Rebbe, we keep 2 days. So they want to know, should they keep 1 day like where they're from and how they've done their whole life and where they're going back to? Or should they keep 2 days because they're by the Rebbe and the Rebbe's keeping 2 days? So the Rebbe didn't say what to do. You know what the Rebbe said? The Rebbe said 2 days of the holiday, you could have removed this issue completely. Meaning, what the Rebbe was implying was, I told you to make a legal verdict that Mashiach is now. And you refused. And now you're coming to me with this technical legal question about how to behave someone from Israel. Should he keep a second day because we're in exile? We didn't have to be in exile. If you had done what I told you, seemingly the Rebbe is saying, we wouldn't need to be in exile now, and this whole question would be moot. This whole question would be irrelevant. So that's just a vignette from the Rebbe, which brings out the enormous power of rabbis coming together and making a legal verdict about something. What we're seeing here also very strongly is the Rebbe is looking at a spiritual reality as creating a physical reality. Meaning the rabbis created a spiritual reality. They created a spiritual, legal, Torah verdict. That's a spiritual reality. And the Rebbe is saying that spiritual reality shifted the physical reality. And that's why all these people in the world, and especially the leaders of the world, because these are the kings of the Jewish people, so they're affecting the kings of the world, they're all start thinking along the lines of war. Why do we do that? Aggression. Why do we do that? That's wrong. Their physical thought processes have shifted because they have a spiritual reality. So there's this very strong link, the Rebbe is saying, of a spiritual reality creating a physical reality. And of course, that's really how we live our lives, because we believe in the Spirit, we believe in service of God, we believe in its power, and we believe that as we serve and draw down spirituality, the physical changes, the physical shifts, and the physical is more and more in line with the spiritual. Has anyone had any experiences that reinforce that to them, this very close connection, this parallelism between the spiritual reality and the physical reality? Sabra?
Oh, I was just thinking back to taking care of my husband who had Parkinson's. And although it was so difficult at times and I was so exhausted, I took strength from knowing that it was God's will, divine will, that I be Steve's caregiver.
Wow.
It's beautiful. Wow.
Thank you.
For sharing.
Thank you.
Wow. How long was he sick for?
9 years.
Wow.
But I'm grateful. I'm grateful to have been his caregiver. I wouldn't want anyone else to have done it. Thank you.
Someone
I can
else
relate
have a
to
simpler
her.
example, Dixie?
Well, I can relate to what she just said, because in Christianity, I mean, we've been out for years, but it's very, I don't know how you want to say it, self-centered religion in a sense.
Mhm.
And when Jack got sick, really sick, but when we came into Judaism, before Jack even got sick, I realized that my role in life was not putting myself first, but was putting Jack first. And I learned that I took care of Jack came first. And before that, I kind of came first. And he spoiled me rotten. He treated me like a queen. So it was easy to come first. But then when I realized my job on earth was to take care of Jack, that was all, not anybody else. He was my husband, and he was the first thing in my life. And no matter what, I was to take care of him. And I spent, oh my goodness, hours, and he would help me too. But when he got the cancer and everything, we started juicing and we started eating correct, no meats, red meats, fish and salads. And and juicing all these vegetables and hours. And, but I was happy because I was taking care of Jack, and he was my main thing that God gave us. God made us soulmates, and that was my job. And I learned my job. It was later in life, but I learned it.
That's beautiful. That's exactly what Sabra is saying. That's so beautiful that the spiritual and the physical become one. It's a complete synergy. It's a perfect synergy of the spiritual and the physical.
Mhm.
It really defines peace, inner peace, when
Yeah,
you're
purpose
doing
with
the godly thing.
it makes our love so much stronger.
Anyone else?
Hi, it's Robin.
Hi, Robin.
Hi. Yeah, I agree that it makes your life it's a more godly world and you're doing God's work and it's worth it.
And you've also seen this spiritual, physical.
Yes, spiritual, physical, mentally, emotional, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's what the Rebbe is
Yeah.
saying here. As the spiritual shifts, the physical shifts.
Yeah.
That's synergy. It's one. You know, we can see one dimension, and there's a far more powerful other dimension that we can't see, but we can study, we can discuss, we can sense, we can feel.
Mm-hmm.
And we're very fortunate. We're very blessed. It makes
It's
our
like
lives
it's like a higher level of knowing.
absolutely. That's a great way to put it. A very transcendent knowledge. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And when we can peer into that transcendent knowledge, exactly what Sarah said, exactly what Dixie said, we just feel so strong and secure in knowing we're walking with God, doing
Mm-hmm.
His will in the very physical details of our life.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. All right. So with this, we conclude the part of, not the talk, but the part of the talk I wanted to share that I felt was so relevant to all of us. And it's a lot to think about, and a lot to think about. One, my thoughts are really coming from God's morality. That's a very beautiful thing to contemplate. As we were saying, as Danielle shared so strongly, how has my innate morality shifted as I've studied more and more God's will, and how more and more clear has my vision of morality become? The
Mm-hmm.
Noahide, seeing everything as rational and doing everything because it's God's will, and the world racing to redemption because that's a spiritual reality. So that has to naturally unfold in the physical.